here at the museum. And welcome to our lunchtime gallery talk on Daumier by the curator of the show, Abigail Weir. As you know, the museum has very rich collections and works on paper, and one of the collections that's dear and near to my heart is the collections of political and social satires, or what we call cartoons. And we've had this wonderful Daumier collection in the museum, but haven't shared it until now, as far as I know. And we've been adding to it slowly but surely over time. Some of the things you've seen here have just been added into the collection within the last 5 years. So we're very glad to present that to you all, also in conjunction with the French department, who are Vivian Kogan and also Roxana Verona are teaching classes that are using this show. In fact, this week is the
last week and this week.
Last week and this week. And Christian O'Rourke, who teaches in art history, is also using the exhibition for teaching her 19th century art course as well. And we hope also to get the Center for Cartoon Studies students in here as well. As you know, that's in White River Junction, and it's a wonderful institution, and they're very interested in our holdings in this area. So now I'd like to introduce Abigail, Abby as we know her. Abby has worked for the last year as a curatorial assistant here at the museum. She's done an absolutely spectacular job working on all sorts of different sorts of projects, including Felix de la Concha, which you see out in the galleries. And a major project for her was this Daumier exhibition. So she conceived of the exhibition. She also organized it. She chose, we have not showing you, she'll tell you all of our Daumiers. She chose the selection and the themes. So all of it is her. And she also wrote a wonderful brochure, which you can see, which is right around the corner, which I recommend that you pick up if you don't have one on the way out. She's a graduate of Williams College in art history, and she is exploring a possible future in museum careers, and I can say that she has made a stellar start in this exhibition, and with her help with us for this year. So I'm going to hand it over to her, and she will tell you about it.
So thanks, Kathy, and I'm going to apologize for using notes, but it will keep me from being quite as scattered, so I hope you'll all bear with me. So as Kathy said, I am a graduate of Williams College, where I studied a lot of French literature. So this was, for me, a really fantastic project to work on, having done that and working with several professors, as Kathy said, who brought one class came last week and several more will be coming later this week. And as it says on the intro wall, Charles Baudelaire, who is a poet and art critic of the era, described Daumier, the artist here, as one of the most important men, not only in caricature, but in the whole of modern art. So why is he important? Why is he interesting to us now? And looking at the era in which Daumier was working, it's a fascinating time in French history. So much is going on in really every sphere, politically, culturally. There is just kind of transformational, sweeping shifts occurring. And all of that is really evident in his artwork, as well as in the history of the time, which is why it's so interesting to study today. And you see at this time, from the French Revolution at the end of the 18th century, going ahead through Daumier's lifetime, he lives through incredible political turmoil, the shifts of up and down between monarchy and democracies, back and forth and back and forth. And in the social realm, you see women struggling to have some sort of parity or increased parity with men. You see Paris shifting from being a medieval city into a system of broad, modern boulevards. The middle class is increasing. You see the bourgeoisie rising and having an upper middle class as well. So there's really just this incredible sweep towards modernity that's occurring at this time, and Daumier's work shows all of that, which is why it's so exciting to look at. And I think that what I want you all to do is, instead of moving, just if everyone can sort of look towards the case that might be behind you or in front of you or wherever, what we have in there that's really fantastic is the Charivari Journal from the year 1847, a variety of volumes, as well as another book. And these are really great to look at just as we start, because they're how people in that day would have seen his work. And Daumier was, in fact, famous in his own time, as he is today, and working in these journals. The Charivari that we have there was a daily publication that was very inexpensive and very, very accessible to the Parisian public. So thousands of Parisians every day were reading it, and his work was featured. And his prints would also be sold individually. And the other book behind it that's smaller is all images, 100 images from a series that was first printed in the Charivari and was so popular that they later put it all into a book, and thousands were sold. So he was very well known. He was incredibly prolific. He actually, in the Charivari journal, published over 4,000 prints. So he was incredibly well known, and today as then, and was really a part of Parisian and French culture at the time, you know, as a columnist or cartoonist might be today. So that's sort of an interesting parallel that you can think of considering it. So before we turn to look at the actual art, there's just one quote I want to read to you. And it's a little bit long, but it comes from actually the writing of Balzac. And he's working at the same time, and his work is called The Human Comedy. And like Daumier, he is discussing or describing all different parts of Parisian life, of French life of the time, every type of person. And in writing about his work and this work, what he said is, to anyone that understands what he was doing, it would be clear that I attached to common daily facts, hidden or clear to the eye, to acts of individual lives, to their causes and principles and passions, the importance which historians have before ascribed only to events of public national life. This crowd of actors, of characters, this multitude of lives gives a picture of the tastes and vice and unbridled powers in great cities where extremes of good and evil meet. And I read that, and I really feel that it gives kind of an overview of everything Daumier is doing too. So anyway, think about that, I guess. So this exhibition is divided thematically, and I just want to talk about a couple of prints in each section, some of my favorites. And as Kathy said, there's 30 on view. There's almost 60 in the museum's collection. So I would really invite you all to kind of look up close later, but I have some favorites, having looked at them all, that I want to just talk about and give an introduction to. So this first section here is, as it says in the title, political caricature. And Daumier's first work was all in a political sphere. He later moved over into social art, or social commentary. But yes, he started in the political realm. And yes, and so what works I want to look at, right, are these three right here. And all of these are caricatures of Louis Philippe, who came into power following the fall of the Bourbon Restoration, which follows the French Revolution and the brief movement towards democracy. And Louis Philippe is sort of an interesting figure because he had really a lot of popular support as he came into power and called himself the King of the French rather than the King of France, to suggest that he was like the citizens' kind of king. But very swiftly, he became a lot more strict and severe and lost quite a bit of that popular support and was harshly ridiculed and, yeah, just became unpopular, all of which is seen in these three prints. So both of these are sort of more obvious portraits of him. And you can see in this one right here, the title of which is 1830 and 1833, 1830 being the year he came into power. He looks a little different 3 years later than he does when he starts. In 1830, all of his hair is nicely done, and he looks like he's sort of sitting up straighter, at least to me. His face is not as lined. And in 1833, he's kind of drooping down. He's fallen. His hair is, no longer in this really nice formation. And it's 3 years later, he's very dissatisfied. People are dissatisfied with him. Similarly, in this print, which is the past, the present, and the future, you see the same shape with three different faces. And later, if you get a chance to look up close, you'll see that in the past, he's sort of happy, satisfied, looking content, the start of his reign. The present, he looks pretty grouchy, displeased to say the least, and in the future, he looks really angry and even more unhappy than he does in the present. So again, it's suggesting his loss of popularity and how that's just going to continue. Also, what you see in the shape of him, in this distinctive hairstyle, is the beginnings of this metaphor, visual metaphor that was used for Louis Philippe, called La Poire, or the pear. And it was developed with Daumier and with the publisher of the journal. And what it is it suggests, this shape is suggestive of a pear, and it was suggestive of his physical shape. And it is, it's a sexual pun. It's an insult, calling him sort of a impotent or a simpleton, an imbecile. So nothing that, it's what you want to be calling the king. And this symbol for him, the pear, became so prevalent that it was banned, its use, because everyone would see a pear and immediately link it to the king. And the pear metaphor is referenced and used in Victor Hugo and Flaubert and Stendhal. So it was really, I think there's stories of it even being scribbled on walls as graffiti. So it was really this very well-known symbol that just completely undercut the king and his power. And here, Daumier shows one of the sort of most well-known and most intimate advisors to the king, and the caption says, he calls him Monsieur Montagibet as a bad pastry chef. And what you see in front of him on his tray is a huge pear. So again, there, he doesn't even give him a face, but it's clear to people looking at it that this would have been the king, and obviously being served as dessert is not a way of honoring King Louis Philippe. So this was this imagery getting used over and over again, and actually the publisher of the journal even went to court and was tried over this particular pear image and how strong it was. And following the years of these images, Louis Philippe really tightened all the censorship laws. So Daumier was even jailed for, I believe, 6 months over one particular image, and as was the publisher for another one. It became too difficult to try and engage in any kind of political commentary. So at that point, Daumier and the journal, the Charivari, shifted over to really more social commentary. But before we get over to that, I did want to look at 2 other political prints right here from both in the right around late 1870. And because of the harsh the censorship laws that were put in place by Louis Philippe, while the various regimes changed, some were more empire, some were more republic, all kept in place fairly tight censorship fines and restrictions in general until 1870. So this is his first chance since 1833 or so, 1834, to comment on the political situation. And you can see these 2, which are pretty representative of his political commentary of the time, are incredibly different from these 3: sexual pun, joking, belittling of King Louis Philippe. So these right here are a landscape in 1870 and Napoleon Square, both, as I said, from the end of the year 1870, which is during the Franco-Prussian War. And were completed just after Napoleon III, who is deposed. And Napoleon III, in one more complicated French historical twist, starts out as, a president type of figure, and then takes over authoritarian power and becomes, shifts from the Second Republic to the Second Empire. And he gets the country involved in the Franco-Prussian War, which is a huge defeat for the French. And both of these prints suggest, the incredible loss and desolation and devastation that was wrought by Napoleon III's policies. They're both very bare and bleak landscapes. There's not a single person in either one. I mean, there's only the suggestion of civilization, but in both cases it's either, a destroyed town with this cannon and the battlements, probably suggesting the siege of Paris, which was, again, devastating for the Parisians, led to thousands of deaths. Or over here, humanity is only suggested by the tombstones. So, again, it's just very simply depicting the loss and kind of the halt that has sort of come to life, which again is really different from him as a 40 years younger, 35 years younger, making fun of the king and his pear shape. So they're just an interesting contrast to see. Anyway, we'll continue moving around and basically concentrate on social caricature for the remainder. And so, as I said, Daumier then transitions with the journal in which he's working, the Charivari, into the social sphere. And as I wanted to say earlier but forgot, Charivari, what it means, someone asked me this, is it's a racket. And it's in particular suggestive of the sound created by pots and pans banging together. So it's just kind of rousing up everything and bringing up different issues and bringing different problems to light. And as he does in the political sphere, in the social arena, Daumier brings up all these different types of people, all these different issues, all these different facets of French life. And it's interesting, if you have time to look at more than the several that I'll point out, how many issues or the types of things still present today, from the educational system and women, apartment living. It's all the same issues, really. So that's another reason why I think it's so fascinating. But so Daumier, in his caricature, uses physical characteristics. He exaggerates them and uses actual characteristics as the basis for this humor and for revealing different aspects of human behavior. So he's depicting them, from without, and using their physical characteristics to imply something about their character. And in some ways, as we look at these Parisian type section, it's almost like, you see someone walking along the Paris, the city street, and what do you take from that? And what can you infer from their characteristics? So one thing that he does is he creates a number of stock characters that he can use over and over. And one of them, the most famous of which, is Robert Macaire, who is also the character in that book, the smaller of the two books in the case. And he was incredibly popular. Daumier made 101 images of Robert Macaire, and it later was republished. And Macaire is a bourgeois figure, and in the way that the bourgeoisie was criticized by Daumier, he's social climbing, he's very ambitious, and he'll stop at nothing for his ambition. So he's really a con man. And Daumier shows him over and over again in all these different guises. In the exhibition, you see him here as a doctor. He's across the gallery. We'll look at him again as himself. In that book, you can see him as a man in love, actually, you know, taking advantage of this woman. You can see him as a philanthropist, actually taking money from poor people, as a lawyer, as a merchant, as a dentist. Basically, in every different occupation, he's always trying to get something from the people around him. And here he is, he's a doctor, and it says free consultations in the back, but if you read, you'll find out that in fact, he's going to charge this guy 20 francs for each of those bottles that he's holding. So really taking advantage of the, you know, the poor Parisian class, and obviously misrepresenting himself by saying free consultations when you show up to get your medication and it's actually quite expensive. So that's one thing. Another thing that Daumier does is he creates, there are typical features which he links to the bourgeoisie. And basically if you see those types of physical features in the face especially, you know it's one of his characters from the bourgeoisie class. And those features in particular are basically the opposite of what you would see if you went to a museum and you saw a Greek or Roman statue of a god. They're absolutely unidealized. Instead of beautifying his subjects, he actually exaggerates how non-ideal, non-refined they are, as another way to make fun of the ambitions of this increasingly, I don't know, ambitious middle class. So you can see that in this man. His features with this big bulbous nose, for example, are among those that he links to that class. And both of these, I think, are both really funny. And they both talk about apartment life in Paris at the time, the housing shortages, the movement into the cities. And this one right here, the caption says, "A neighbor complaining of someone watering his grass." And you'll see it's a man standing on his balcony, horrified, looking up, because this man above him, his neighbor, is watering his plants, but of course it's really just watering him. And, you know, it's making a joke that all of a sudden people are not out in the country, they don't have huge tracts of land, your neighbor's above you, right above you, very close, and there's all these adjustments that need to be made in order to move into this new style of life. This is also, you know, and it's the series it comes from is Tenants and Renters. And we have right here is a renter who has just been evicted, or he's in the process of being evicted. And the caption here says, "Oh, he's kicked me out, but I'll take along his wallpaper. I wish I could take along his walls." And, you know, you can see he's furious. His face is just really, really tightly screwed up in one of these great expressions and sort of dynamic figures that Daumier makes. And he's really just ripping the wallpaper down. So again, he's really clearly expressing this housing shortage that was very, very real for the Parisians at this time, and the rents were going up as people realized they could charge more and more, and people would need to pay for it. This is another really fun print, Man Overboard, from the series Parisian Voters. And so as this bourgeois class is growing, people have more leisure time than they've ever had before, and so they need to find activities to fill it up. And one activity that is extremely trendy, mid-19th century, is boating. And it was an activity that was always reserved for the very highest classes. So what you have here are three boaters, only they're not, in fact, the aristocracy. You know, they're middle-class workers who suddenly have some time to go boating, and they're totally unskilled. They have no idea what they're doing. You know, one has fallen in, and the other two are trying to pull him out. One guy has the harpoon, so it looks to me, you know, he's about to stab him. And the other one's pulling him out, but he's pulling him out by his feet, so his head's still underwater, you know, he can't breathe. So it's really, you know, not a very successful attempt to engage in these upper class activities. And I think this one is also interesting artistically, like the three-sided portrait that we saw of Louis Philippe. Both of these reference other works of art that were well known at the time. This, John Singleton Copley's Watson and the Shark. So Daumier is actually quite educated, having taken art classes and spent a lot of time in the Louvre galleries. And throughout his work, you see these kinds of references. In addition to the humor that any person could see, he is kind of dealing in this art historical realm. And the portrait from before of Louis Philippe references a Titian portrait that's, again, tripartite. So that is another interesting layer of the work that he's doing. Moving along a little further into this social section, we have Daumier's lithographs of women, in particular women who are either educated or have literary and political aspirations, and Daumier is pretty clear what he feels about that, which is, not very good. But so all except the one colored lithograph at the far end of this section are all from a series, The Blue Stockings, or Les Bas Bleus. And the Blue Stockings had been a literary discussion group in England just before Daumier was working. And it was a mixed gender group, but it did support women's literary equality with men. And Daumier's wife, in fact, was apparently a very educated woman, but he, throughout this series and other work, really undercuts the idea that women could have any kind of ability in a literary realm. So he really makes fun of these blue stocking women over and over and over again, and that's 5 of the 6 in this women's section come from that series. So here we have these 2 women, and Daumier has kind of emphasized his viewpoint about educated women by creating figures who lack all of the qualities that at the time would have been associated with the desirable, ideal French woman. So we have these women that are similar to those seen in these other prints. Their hair is unkempt, they don't have good posture, they don't seem to be very graceful, they're sort of pinched looking in their facial expressions, not what then would have been conventionally a beautiful woman. And here the caption reads, "What, another caricature of us this morning in the Charivari? What a day. I hope that this time it is the last one. If I ever catch Daumier, it's going to cost him dearly for daring to knit us blue stockings." So, and you can see right there, they're holding, this journal, the Charivari, and it even looks like it's two women in the figure, on the image there. So this is image 39 from the series, and it was a very well-known series of prints. At this point, people were very aware of what Daumier was doing, just making fun of this group of women. And Daumier is also incredibly aware of his own fame and his own place in this discussion about women's abilities by, referring to himself and to the publication in the print. If we move along here, you see again, he's showing these unconventional women. Down here, they're all smoking cigarettes, which is not what a respectable woman of the day should be doing. Here you have this hunched over, pinched woman, again, not very graceful. And here in this larger woman with the large bustle, in this print, you see she has the same kind of big bulbous nose that we saw over here as being linked to the bourgeois class. So this is the female kind of equivalent of that type of a figure in a lot of ways. Another one here that I really like is this. And it's, again, making fun of women's literary aspirations, but doing it in a different way than that. Here you have instead this very beautiful, in a more conventional way, slight figure with this very elaborate dress and this bonnet and scarf sailing about in the wind. And the caption, she's poised at the edge of a cliff and sort of very romantic. And the caption says, "Oh, Victor, my darling, a poetic notion has come to me. Let's throw ourselves down together from this gray cliff into the blue of the ocean." And, Victor, much more pragmatic and thoughtful, says, "Drown ourselves in the sea. Let us reflect on this, Anastasia. I would like to descend yet a while the river of life." So this is instead talking about, women whose work was being published at the time. It was very frequently derided as being too sentimental and romantic, just very saccharine and not substantial. And that is, Anastasia just wanting to fling herself about and take part in this very romantic story, like in some sort of sensationalist Gothic novel. They're going to fling themselves over the cliff together. So again, it's another way of talking about this issue of women and literature that was going on at the time. Here, from another series, but still related, the series is The Socialist Women, so it's a little bit more addressing politically minded women of the time. The caption says, "My wife has stayed such a long time at this banquet. It's almost 48 hours since she left." And, you see this guy, and he's slumped over, head in his hands, next to the table. The kid is on the floor, has the top hat and the cane, all of the man's attributes. Kid is taken over. The wife is nowhere to be seen. So this is, as some of the other work that we don't have pictured here, but in Daumier's work, suggests that women, as they become more free politically or socially, also will become increasingly disloyal, when no one's keeping an eye on them. So she's been off for 48 hours at this banquet, but who knows what else she could have been doing at this time. And you have this poor, helpless guy, which I think is kind of interesting because he's pretty emasculated, unable to really do anything without her there to take care of the kid or anything. So those are Daumier's women. If we keep going around, the next little section here is classical. And in France at this time, there was still this remaining idolization of classical antiquity and the Greeks and the Romans and their art and their literature and their styles of education as being the height of what could be attained. So Daumier makes fun of this, that sort of ongoing reverence for the classical, and also uses it to, keep undercutting the bourgeoisie throughout it and their own social climbing and ambitions in general. So these are all a little bit different, but one that's particularly fun to look at here is The Torment of Tantalus. And this comes from a series, Ancient History, wherein Daumier depicts many different myths from classical mythology, but takes away the main figures of these gods or goddesses or semi-immortal figures and puts in figures from the French bourgeoisie. So here you have Tantalus, and in mythology, Tantalus strove to be, equal to the gods, abused his privileges, and is condemned to eternal suffering. And in a traditional image of Tantalus, he is strapped to a tree, and he can't get the fruit from the tree, but he has water up to his neck, but he can't quite reach it to drink. So he's suffering eternally. But here, instead, you see this figure strapped to a tree, water, fruit. Only the other additional elements that have been inserted are, foie gras, fish, champagne or wine, grapes. So it's all of the accoutrement, foods of the French aristocracy that this bourgeois figure is now trying to get, and they're what he's eternally suffering because he can't have them. So that's sort of the way that most of that series is working. Yeah.
I mean, you were saying he is devastating his caricature of women of the bourgeoisie, but he's equally devastating his caricature of men of the bourgeoisie.
Oh, yes, certainly.
How they were ignoring the problems of the society, particularly the lower class.
Yeah.
Who didn't have enough to eat, didn't have a place to stay. And so he was devastating both, and then he was equally devastating of the upper class, who had no notion of what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, he caricatures everyone. Basically, no one escapes his target, and I don't think he's, at least from, and I'm by no means an expert in this, but from what I've looked at, he is in no way championing one group or one type of individual. Basically, everyone just gets kind of cut apart by his little lithographic pen. But yeah, you make a good point that no one's really, he's not really happy with what anyone is doing. Yeah, no one's free from his satire. Definitely is what it seems like from looking at his work. We'll just look at a couple more here. And this section is devoted to the arts. And one of the professors that Kathy mentioned earlier, Kristen O'Rourke, will be giving a gallery talk this summer just focused on Daumier in the art world. So if you're interested, that will be happening. And this is another figure of Robert Macaire, who I mentioned earlier. And it's sort of a fun image because this is Macaire, who you can maybe recognize from if you go up close to the doctor. And this is the exact image that it's open to in the book, in the case. And in theory, he's talking to Daumier right here. And he's saying, Monsieur Daumier, your series of Robert Macaire is a charming thing. It is the exact representation of the sins of our time. It's a true portrait of the bunch of thieves that one finds everywhere, in business, in politics, in the courtroom, in the financial world, everywhere. And sort of goes on. The scum must be upset with you. You have the esteem of the honest man, but how come you do not yet have official recognition? It is revolting. So again, here, well, first of all, of course, Macaire is part of the scum that's, you know, the scoundrels that one finds everywhere, but he's not presenting himself as such. But also, again, Daumier is referring to himself in his artwork, even showing himself at work and talking about, you know, his work in the Charivari, just as he does in that image of the two women. So he's very reflexive and referential. And I think the last one that I want to talk about, and then I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has, is this print right here, because it's really different than anything else that's on view. You know, someone asked me earlier if there was writing on the back and if they were on newspapers. And as you can see from the Charivari in the center, you know, yes, there is writing on the back. Most of these are just taken from a journal that was, you know, people purchased and read on a daily basis. This is actually a print done after a major painting of Daumier's that he exhibited in the Salon of 1849, the yearly exhibition sponsored by the government in Paris. And it's called The Ass and the Two Thieves. So it's from the writing of La Fontaine, who was one of Daumier's favorite authors, and you have the two thieves fighting over the ass when the third thief is riding it away, you know, an allegory of opportunity. But this is really important to see because Daumier didn't think of himself as just a political commentator, you know, or just someone who made prints for the Charivari. That was really what he did to support himself. And while in many ways that's what he's most known for at this point, he really saw himself as a fine artist, and he really was talented in painting as well as in sculpture. And you know, this was exhibited in the Salon, or rather the painting of it was. But, so this is, I thought, is an important place to maybe end because it just shows, you know, this is really what Daumier wanted to be considered as an artist, not just as someone making cartoons about what was going on in the world. And it really is a beautiful print. So, yeah, this is it, The Ass and the Two Thieves. And if anyone has any questions, I would love to answer them.
question about the colored prints.
Yeah.
And is that a function of time? They would be colored later, or is that only for certain occasions, or are these prints after the fact?
These are hand colored, the ones that are colored, and I know, for example, that the book of Robert McFerre images that's in that case was also published in larger images that were all hand colored after they'd been printed. Bart, I don't know if you know anything more about kind of color lithography.
Well,
We'll pass the buck.
in political caricature, it was very common to hand color things. It was very complicated to do multi-plate printing, which coloring would have necessitated. So very early on in the 18th century as well, they would do the prints in black and white, and then they would hire a set of people to color them, and you would pay slightly more for a hand-colored version. They would often use a sort of an example that had been pre-done by the artist, who would fix the colors, and those were very carefully copied by artisans that were hired for that. Often they were women. And I'm more familiar with England than I am with French, but obviously with lithography, it is a bit easier to do some multi-plate or multi-stone color printings, but these things aren't worth that much money, and to put that much effort into them is rare. It's a very rare.
And my follow-up is just the degree to which the artist had a say or control over how they were colored, and whether that was just
Usually the artist would do a sort of a master that they would be colored after. But I'm not sure that would do. I know that's the case with other caricature artists.
How unusual was it for him to have created a plate that was basically fine art? Was it so almost all of his work were caricatures or creations for the popular press, or did he have a whole series which he then created?
Yeah, I mean, he has a lot. This exhibition really only seeks to suggest his lithography and these caricatures. He has a lot. I mean, he did a lot of work in painting and then prints. So how common was it to do one then after a painting? Again, I actually might defer to Kathy if you know it.
He did some, but it wasn't as
Yeah.
prolific as his other print work.
Yeah.
He also was a sculptor as well. So he had very high aspirations as an artist, but as Abby says, this is his bread and butter.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the publication, in the middle of the Charivari, he published in it continually from 1835 until 1870, and there's a couple of years in the 1860s where he didn't. So that's really where the bulk of his work is.
The only sculptures I've seen by him are caricatures of the people in Parliament. Did he do sculptures that were non-caricatures?
All I've seen are images of his caricatures, such as the parliamentary figures. So not that I know of, but again, I'm not an expert at all.
Abby, I have a curatorial question. Is that you've had a chance to look at all of the prints that we have currently in the collection, looking at some of the dates when they've entered in. It's been probably the last 60 years or so that they've been coming in piecemeal. What future direction, what are we missing that we should be looking for in the way of gifts or acquisitions?
Well, I mean, I would say what we're missing and is any of his lawyer figures are, incredibly important. And they're also more expensive, but they're an incredibly important series and subject matter for him. So I would say figures, in particular lawyers, but otherwise government figures who are not particular caricatures, but rather like a type, would also be of interest, I would say, to our collections. It's not really anything in that area.
There are two major prints that go for quite a lot of money. One's the legislative body, and the other and another one is the Rue Trasno.
Oh, yeah.
You know that one where there's a massacre of civilians by government shows a guy in his nightcap below his bed. He's been
Yeah.
killed in a nighttime raid. So those he's a great spirit in terms of the free speech and criticism of the government, and obviously with our problems with Wall Street, we could use him to death.
I know he's really interesting how many of, as I said, the issues are still issues that are really pressing today in whatever way. So it's really worth looking around and seeing all the different areas that he addresses in his work. Yeah.
You mentioned that the government or the king or whoever had some crackdowns.
Yeah.
Some maybe, I don't know, it was all from 30 all the way to 1870. Was he ever in jail or did he ever have problems with some of these publications that he got arrested? Or?
Yeah, he did get arrested for, before there was the Charivari, the same publisher had a journal, La Caricature, and that was more expensive to be made, and it was only weekly, and originally actually the Charivari was created to pay for all the fines that the earlier journal incurred because of the political commentary. So actually, Daumier had a print of Louis Philippe as Gargantua, and he's taking all the food from the poor people, and he's excreting out favors to his political favorites, and that he did get sent to jail for 6 months. So that's also a very well-known print.
And available.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yes, right.
Thank you very much. That was